Part 1, Chapter 10 of The Idiot. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Eva M. Martin. Part 1, Chapter 10. The entrance hall suddenly became full of noise and people. To judge from the sounds which penetrated to the drawing-room, a number of people had already come in, and the stampede continued. Several voices were talking and shouting at once. Others were talking and shouting on the stairs outside. It was evidently a most extraordinary visit that was about to take place. Everyone exchanged startled glances. Gania rushed out towards the dining-room, but a number of men had already made their way in, and met him. "Ah, here he is, the Judas!" cried a voice which the prince recognized at once. "How d'ye do, Gania, you old blackguard?" "Yes, that's the man," said another voice. There was no room for doubt in the prince's mind. One of the voices was Rogojin's, and the other Lebedeff's. Gania stood at the door like a block and looked on in silence, putting no obstacle in the way of their entrance, and 10 or a dozen men marched in behind Parfen Rogojin. They were a decidedly mixed-looking collection, and some of them came in their furs and caps. None of them were quite drunk, but all appeared to be considerably excited. They seemed to need each other's support, morally, before they dared come in. Not one of them would have entered alone, but with the rest each one was brave enough. Even Rogojin entered rather cautiously at the head of his troop, but he was evidently preoccupied. He appeared to be gloomy and morose, and had clearly come with some end in view. All the rest were merely chorus, brought in to support the chief character. Besides Lebedeff, there was the dandy Zalesheff, who came in with his coat and hat. 2 or 3 others followed his example. The rest were more uncouth. They included a couple of young merchants, a man in a greatcoat, a medical student, a little Pole, a small fat man who laughed continuously, and an enormously tall, stout one who apparently put great faith in the strength of his fists. A couple of ladies of some sort put their heads in at the front door, but did not dare come any farther. Colia promptly banged the door in their faces and locked it. "Hallo, Gania, you blackguard! You didn't expect Rogojin, eh?" said the latter, entering the drawing-room and stopping before Gania. But at this moment he saw seated before him Nastasia Philipovna. He had not dreamed of meeting her here, evidently, for her appearance produced a marvellous effect upon him. He grew pale, and his lips became actually blue. "I suppose it is true, then," he muttered to himself, and his face took on an expression of despair. "So that's the end of it. Now you, sir, will you answer me or not?" he went on suddenly, gazing at Gania with ineffable malice. "Now then, you—" He panted and could hardly speak for agitation. He advanced into the room mechanically, but perceiving Nina Alexandrovna and Varia, he became more or less embarrassed in spite of his excitement. His followers entered after him, and all paused a moment at sight of the ladies. Of course their modesty was not fated to be long-lived, but for a moment they were abashed. Once let them begin to shout, however, and nothing on earth should disconcert them. "What, you here too, prince?" said Rogojin absently, but a little surprised all the same. "Still in your gaiters, eh?" He sighed, and forgot the prince the next moment, and his wild eyes wandered over to Nastasia again, as though attracted in that direction by some magnetic force. Nastasia looked at the new arrivals with great curiosity. Gania recollected himself at last. "Excuse me, sirs," he said loudly, "but what does all this mean?" He glared at the advancing crowd generally, but addressed his remarks especially to their captain, Rogojin. "You are not in a stable, gentlemen, though you may think it. My mother and sister are present." "Yes, I see your mother and sister," muttered Rogojin through his teeth, and Lebedeff seemed to feel himself called upon to second the statement. "At all events, I must request you to step into the salon," said Gania, his rage rising quite out of proportion to his words, "and then I shall inquire—" "What, he doesn't know me?" said Rogojin, showing his teeth disagreeably. "He doesn't recognize Rogojin." He did not move an inch, however. "I have met you somewhere, I believe, but—" "Met me somewhere? Pooh! Why, it's only 3 months since I lost 200 roubles of my father's money to you at cards. The old fellow died before he found out. Ptitsin knows all about it. Why, I've only to pull out a 3-rouble note and show it to you, and you'd crawl on your hands and knees to the other end of the town for it. That's the sort of man you are. Why, I've come now at this moment to buy you up. Oh, you needn't think that because I wear these boots I have no money. I have lots of money, my beauty, enough to buy up you and all yours together. So I shall, if I like to. I'll buy you up. I will!" he yelled, apparently growing more and more intoxicated and excited. "Oh, Nastasia Philipovna, don't turn me out. Say one word, do. Are you going to marry this man or not?" Rogojin asked his question like a lost soul appealing to some divinity, with the reckless daring of one appointed to die, who has nothing to lose. He awaited the reply in deadly anxiety. Nastasia Philipovna gazed at him with a haughty, ironical expression of face. But when she glanced at Nina Alexandrovna and Varia, and from them to Gania, she changed her tone all of a sudden. "Certainly not. What are you thinking of? What could have induced you to ask such a question?" she replied quietly and seriously, and even, apparently, with some astonishment. "No? No?" shouted Rogojin, almost out of his mind with joy. "You are not going to, after all? And they told me! Oh, Nastasia Philipovna, they said you had promised to marry him. Him! As if you could do it! Him! Pooh! I don't mind saying it to everyone. I'd buy him off for 100 roubles any day. Pooh! Give him 1,000 or 3 if he likes, poor devil, and he'd cut and run the day before his wedding, and leave his bride to me. Wouldn't you, Gania, you blackguard? You'd take 3,000, wouldn't you? Here's the money, look, I've come on purpose to pay you off and get your receipt, formally. I said I'd buy you up, and so I will." "Get out of this, you drunken beast!" cried Gania, who was red and white by turns. Rogojin's troop, who were only waiting for an excuse, set up a howl at this. Lebedeff stepped forward and whispered something in Parfen's ear. "You're right, clerk," said the latter. "You're right, tipsy spirit. You're right. Nastasia Philipovna," he added, looking at her like some lunatic, harmless generally, but suddenly wound up to a pitch of audacity. "Here are 18,000 roubles, and you shall have more." Here he threw a packet of banknotes tied up in white paper on the table before her, not daring to say all he wished to say. "No, no, no!" muttered Lebedeff, clutching at his arm. He was clearly aghast at the largeness of the sum, and thought a far smaller amount should have been tried first. "No, you fool! You don't know whom you are dealing with. "And it appears I am a fool too," said Parfen.